Hey everybody, it's Bust here to talk about the 3.14 patch. This is going to signal the start of the Darkin Saga, Awakening, the new big set, the new big cycle of cards we'll be seeing throughout the remainder of the year, and the end of the Forces from Beyond style season. And so I'm going to do this video a little bit differently. I don't really feel like sitting around and talking about all the cards and what you're going to see in the upcoming days. I will talk about the cards a little bit here in the first section. And then in the very last section, but everything in the middle is just going to be design related. And so if you're wanting to learn what the new best card is, you can skip to the end for a sweet hot take. But in the middle, I'm just going to talk about design stuff and take a small departure away from the competitive lands of seasonal play and the Masters ladder. And so, in this first section, I was really curious how Riot was going to handle the likes of Pirates and Kaisa coming out of seasonals. I wanted to put some stats and some numbers to the gameplay that we saw, but I was curious how this patch was going to be like if Riot really understood the extent that Kaisa was going to be warping the meta. And if they felt like they did enough going into seasonals, or if they're kind of having let's wait and see kind of take on the format in terms of how Kaisa was going to go. And the reason we're calling this all out, we've known that for the entirety of the ladder season, essentially, that both Pirates and Kaisa were the big boogeymen of the format. Kaisa was the biggest one, though. It always felt like Kaisa wasn't the top dog because you were seeing Action Kaisa, Kaisa Sivir, and Mono Kaisa as three different decks in air quotes. Whenever you looked at stats, those were all three distinct kind of delineations of the Kaisa deck. But if we're looking at seasonals and the commonality of the decks being brought, Pirates was brought, looks like in 25 or 26% of the deck lists or so. Looks like Action Kaisa was only brought in next most common at 25% or so. But again, Action Kaisa is the same deck as these other ones. There's slight differences, sure, but at their core, they're big Kaisa decks. And so you really have Kaisa at about 25%, Kaisa on her own at about 13%, and then Kaisa Sivir at about 8%, which when you add that all up, gets you pretty close to 40, somewhere in the 40% range, which is actually pretty huge. You don't really see that massive amount of play rate very frequently in Runeterra. And so I was curious coming into the new season and the new patch if Riot was going to say, fuck this, we're kind of done with Kaisa for a bit. I know you are too. Let's kind of throw the book at her and get her off this top spot in the meta. Or if she would, be allowed to kind of persist. And, we only saw some minor changes, just one. In fact, they took a minor adjustment to Void Abomination, make it cost 9 mana. I shouldn't say it's a minor adjustment. That's a pretty big one, right? There's not too many 9 and 10 cost cards being played ever. I feel like every game essentially ends by turn 9. I feel like it's a turn 9 game as to where we should expect the games to end. And Void Abomination, I don't feel like really does it at that point, right? If you're spending a turn 9 playing this when you could spend a turn 9 playing Feel the Rush just outright wins the game, to where the Void Abomination, it's pretty close to doing it, but not necessarily. And so I don't feel like this is quite it. I think that the Kaisa decks will adapt and still just be top dogs, and we're still going to have to see a ton of Kaisa and a ton of Pirates as we're during the upcoming brew week, if you will. But I'm curious to see if, in the next patch, if they take a hit or what happens with them. But the kind of big thing to say with this is, as you want to play and brew and try out the new cards, you're still going to run into a shitload of Pirates and Kaisa. Get over it. I'm going to complain about it. I'm sure you're going to complain about it. If you complain, I'm just going to say, fuck it, get over it. And if I complain, I expect you to do the same thing. But, just get ready for it. That's what's coming up. In terms of the other card changes, Deep Meditation and Eye of the Dragon slightly changed to have flow now. Sure, that's a fairly reasonable update. They do functionally get a bit stronger, and then the flow mechanic gets a bit some more support. Fine, I get it. I like to see things like this happen. So it's like understandable. right? You don't have to, if you're a new player and you're like, why doesn't Eye of the Dragon have flow? And you have to be like, well, it doesn't do skills. Just wrap it all together, and it's nice to breathe some life into cards that aren't seeing tons of play, and having them activate off of the other flow mechanics. I think that's kind of nice and well and done. Okay, and so moving away from the lands of the cards themselves, the first thing I wanted to call out was, I make videos for this game essentially every day. I feel like I'm pretty involved in both the game itself and its community and the news and everything. And I had no idea this was a new big expansion. There was no kind of way to say, hey, we're leaving the lands of Forces from Beyond, or whatever that big set was called. We're now moving into the Darkin Saga. I just didn't get it. And I was really kind of like upset with a lot of the design of this set, because they're throwing like a lot of champions and a lot of ideas and a lot of new keywords and everything at us. And for that to just be like a 60 card set, I was like, wow, that's a very bold and ambitious move to release like 5 champions, 2 of them Runeterran, the new thing in equipment and auto equip and flow and forge and improvise and all this shit, and then just be like, oh, here's a new set. These mechanics are basically gone. And it would have made a lot more sense to me had I had known, okay, we have like taken a step from the Forces from Beyond expansion, and now we have moved into the Darkin Saga expansion. And in the other set, like in the other games, I should say, this is like a little bit easier to see and a little bit easier to feel, right? If we're looking at a game like Magic, you can easily say, okay, we're in Ravnica today, right? We're doing shit with the guilds and Ravnica, and all the people are coming together and hanging out, and you can tell that there's like the gold card faction along the lines of all the different keywords and everything. And it makes, a lot of sense, right? You say, okay, this is thematically where we're at. Then in the next set, when you move to Mirrodin and it's all about artifacts and all the spiky shit and everything, you're like, oh, well, this makes sense. I can like visually tell between the two sets that we were in like one plane in one and one plane in the other. And you saw a bit of it in Hearthstone. You'd be like, oh, this is the dinosaur set, or oh, this is the set where we're hanging out in Scolomancer, or oh, this is the set where we're hanging out in Molten Core. And you got like a good feel, like thematically, for each of the different sets. But in looking at all of these new cards, I could not tell the difference between what was happening in the Forces from Beyond and what was happening in the Darkin Saga. Like, I couldn't mentally place whether or not it was because of the visuals or the mechanics or the themes going on, that we were about to enter, air quotes, something different. And so, hopefully they could do something a little bit better with that in the future. I don't have the answer to it, whether or not it's changing up the art or changing up the messaging or making things a little bit more clear. I should not have gotten whatever we're at 2 weeks into spoiler season, and then had to read this text up here that says, "Mwahahaha, Awakening is the first chapter of the Darkin Saga," for me to realize that we were actually entering a new set of mechanics and a new set of themes and ideas. And so, I feel like as someone that's just so invested in the game, if I'm not getting it, then it's very common for people to not get it as well. And so I hope in the future there's something that makes it a little bit more clear. And that ties into the second topic that I had lined up here, I guess the third topic at this point. And I just put that called "Let's Complain About Runeterran Champions." And this is the kind of common thread that we're seeing on Reddit these days. I don't know if that's how the majority feels, or if this is what Reddit's bitching about, then that's probably a good thing. If that's what they're kind of nitpicking on these days, it's not the state of the game or the ladder or certain particular cards. It's just kind of like, well, I wish these things had a little bit more fleshed out around them. And I feel like that's kind of a tie-in with the previous statement. And then it's like, okay, well, here's Kane. Kane turns up. He's working with this cultist mechanic. He's working with the auto-equip mechanic. That means he's working with the equipment mechanic, and he's also working with Darkin. And, there's a lot of shit going on with that. But, there's nothing that was really advertised that says, hey, this is kind of like a sneak peek. There's more of this stuff to come. And so as we, see this, and you see, okay, this is a Runeterran champion. He has this keyword thing that he wants to be playing cultists. It's very tough to understand how much cultist support we're going to see in the future sets, or how much Darkin support we're going to see in the future sets. And so, I feel like, at least in terms of the bitching, I get it, especially if like Kane was your favorite champion in the game, or if whoever the other one was it Nora? No, it was Jax. If Jax was the other favorite champion of yours in the game and you don't think they're going to get any support after this, I feel you. But I think it kind of ties in there at the beginning as to where I didn't know that a new set was coming out. Well, I knew a new set was coming out. I didn't know it was a new big set, if you will. Kind of the other thing, though, I think kind of the flip side of that is I really like the amount of identity that gets wrapped up into these champions like this. I know you're not going to see tons of Weapon Master support throughout the entirety of the game, and as we get like 6 months or a year into the future, if we start to see more than like 1 or 2 or 3 Weapon Master cards, I would be ultimately pretty surprised. But I look at a champion like Jax, and he has the Weapon Master mechanic, and I can immediately kind of piece together that Jax is going to be all about these weapons, and whether or not it's with equipping them or with auto-equip or these Weapon Master bros, or if that ties into improvise or whatnot, I can, like very easily thematically decide that Jax is going to be about weapons. But that's not how it applies for all the champions, especially once you leave the area of Runeterran champions and then you get into the space of just like faction-based champions, right? Like, what does Noxus do? Well, like, Noxus does a bunch of aggressive shit. They have a bunch of, like, cheap early game plays that are very aggressive and attacky. They have lots of big, like, smashy, overwhelming style dudes at the top end of their curve, and then most of their spells do, like, burn damage or help them in combat, right? That sounds very Noxus-y. And so if we like start to roll through the champions, right, we look at Draven, and Draven's like, okay, well, he attacks pretty good, he's cheap and effective, and he helps your other units into battle with his spinning axes and everything. Like, cool, I get it. I get, how Draven ties into Noxus. And then you say, all right, well, what if we look at with a champion like Darius, right? Darius is like, well, he's big and meaty, he has Overwhelm, all these other big and meaty, overwhelmed kind of game enders live with him. And then as his flip card is something like Decimate, that's in that burn package of Demacia. You're like, yeah, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Or not Demacia, and Noxus. And you're like, that makes sense. But then you go over and look at someone like Vladimir. And you're like, hey, Vladimir, how do you fit into Noxus? It's like, do you do aggressive stuff? No. Do you have Overwhelm and crush a late game? No. You have some kind of weird like vampire drain ability. Okay, I don't know how that ties into Noxus. I haven't seen any other drain effects in this faction. I haven't seen any other of these style of tricks. How do you really fit in? And so I think that that's probably just gonna outright happen, given the that every champion in the game isn't Runeterran in nature. But I think with champions like Jax, it really kind of thematically drives home what he's going to do and what he's going to feel like, to where a lot of that gets lost on the champions that don't really fit in with their faction identity. I don't know why Vladimir is a Noxus champion. Maybe that's a lore thing. Maybe he hangs out in the lands of Noxus. Maybe there's more vampires that I just haven't seen yet and don't understand that they exist. But I think that that's some like real serious upside in terms of these Runeterran champions and driving home what they're meant to do. Okay, and then moving into some of the cards, my next section was called Let's Complain About RNG. So we've gotten our complaints about the Runeterran champions out of the way. We're into battle since we're not going to play with the Runeterran champions because we were already busy complaining about them. And now we have to play against Improvise or play against Nora or even play against someone old like Reggie. And so we're going to sit around and complain about these as well. And I'm not immune to it. I've done my fair amount of bitching about RNG, but I feel like it's okay, right? I can certainly envision these scenarios where we start playing cards with Improvise and we want to hit the one over here that has Scout, or we want to hit one of the other, really high-powered ones. And then it just doesn't actually come together, right? Our opponent hits the Scout one, we missed it, and we lost the game because of it, right? That's going to be a very common theme in the upcoming days. But I think at the end of the day, I'm quite happy with the amount of changes that Riot makes to everything. They've, to me, shown their willingness and shown their ability to just really dig in and change shit around if it gets to be too oppressive. And so if Improvise is too strong, or if, Fish a Whack is too strong but Pot of Pain is too weak, I feel like Riot's going to come in and make some edits to these, and everything's going to turn out to be fine. The big one that everyone is, of course, worried about right now is the likes of Nora and the generating of the mysterious portals. I agree, this does look to be exceptionally powerful, but I feel like we're still in that same kind of space, right? Riot eventually said with cards like Bard. Bard is just too good at the moment. We have to do something to really tone this down. The thing that doesn't feel good about Bard is when you hit that really big RNG hit and you hit a chime in like the first turn of the second turn, and then you're just so super far ahead right from the start. And they figured out a creative way to get around it. And so I personally don't feel like Nora is going to be that explosive or that big or that bad. But if it does turn out that she is, I feel like I'm pretty confident in Riot's ability to come out and update these things and tune them and min-max them to where things turn out to be pretty fun. And so if you don't like the direction it's going in, I hate to be that guy that just says go play chess or go play Go or play a game that doesn't have RNG in it. But, that's what makes these games interesting to me, is if we wanted to play a game that didn't have randomness to it, whether or not that's rolling dice or playing decks and drawing cards and stuff like that, then there's options, right? I don't know what the answer is to the proper amount of RNG in a non-perfect information, non-randomized game. But I think Riot's still doing pretty good and pretty well with this, pretty happy with the amount of tuning that they do to everything. And so if Improvise feels like too much or Nora feels like too much, I'm sure it will be readily fixed. And so are we going to complain about this stuff? Sure. I'm sure something will most certainly hit to where things don't go well and we complain about it. But at the end of the day, I think the game is still ultimately quite fun. And I don't think all of these RNG cards are going to take away from that. Okay, and so the next thing I wanted to talk about was faction identity. It ties in a little bit to our discussion of Jax and Vladimir, and it making sense what works with Jax, but how does Vladimir particularly fit in Noxus? And if this isn't familiar to you, it might be in terms of Magic and the color pie, right? If you want to say, okay, how do removal spells work in Magic? And you say, okay, well, red gets to deal damage, right? Red does things like lightning bolt and shock, and they just deal direct damage. And then if you look at, say, something like black, they do the stuff that just directly kills units, right? You can tear a unit, slaughter it, murder it, whatever. You get to directly kill them. If you go to white doesn't get to just kill stuff. It typically just outright removes them from the game, right? It exiles it like a Swords to Plowshares kind of effect, but it's typically limited to things that are either attacking or things that are already tapped. And so they get some removal, but it's pretty limited in what it does. If you go over to green, they have stuff like webs, right? You're battling in a forest, they build a big spider web up in the air. That spider web can kill a flying unit. And so they typically just deal with flyers. And then if you go to blue, doesn't get to kill units. They get to like dazzle them. You get to take away their attack power, or you get to kind of like discombobulate them and send them back to your hand or whatever, but they don't get to directly kill anything. And so whenever you see a removal spell, you should be able to, even without knowing its color, be like, oh, that belongs in this color. Or if you're playing green and you want to say, well, I have issues with something, what other color should I look at to complement green's weakness to deal with non-flying units? And we do get to see a bit of that in Runeterra, right? Shadow Isles gets Vengeance, PNZ gets stuff like Lightning Bolt, Noxus gets stuff like Whirling Death, but we haven't seen a ton of that, in my opinion, in the Land of Units. It was just like every unit was, if it cost 2 mana, it was 5 stats with upside. If it cost 3 mana, it was 6 stats with upside. And there was never anything that said, well, Freylord gets bigger units, Noxus gets good attacky units. So if we're going to spread out the 6 attack, Noxus might be a 4-2. This big Demacia unit might be a 3-4. But PNZ doesn't get big units. And so if we're talking about a 3 cost unit with upside, maybe the one out of PNZ is a 2-2 or a 2-3, right? There hasn't been a ton of that. I feel like Riot, at first and foremost, has been figuring out just what feels right in terms of card quality and how much you're paying for a unit and what it gives you back in return. And this feels like the first kind of space to where we're going to start seeing some of that faction identity. And so I don't know if Adept Weaponsmith is the best example, but essentially being a 4-4 for 3 mana feels very Freylordy to me. And so maybe that's kind of a indicator of things to come. As far as these other ones go, you see things like Favored Artisan, which I'm curious about. as we've been running into a bunch of things like Reggie and Conchologist and the like, which are nerfed heavily down to 3-stat 2-cost units, and now we see Favored Artisan come out as a 5-stat 2-cost unit that generates a card. Like, I'm really kind of bamboozled by this. Is this an indicator that, Freylord is supposed to be able to do this? Freylord's units are meant to be bigger, and the other factions' units aren't meant to be bigger, or what the deal is behind it. And then as you move on to something like Jun the Prodigy, which is now a 7-stat 3-drop, which also gets these additional bonuses attached to it, which is just upside upon upside upon upside, which feels a little weird in Ionia, right? It feels like Ionia doesn't get the big units. Ionia tends to feel like something that is a little bit more evasive or a little bit more crafty in their doings, and not so much big and bruisery. And so I'm kind of curious how the faction identity thing kind of plays out. I'd love to see Riot talk about how the color pie of Runeterra, if you will, is assembled and how things are going, and if they like where things stand and where they don't. But I think it's kind of, number one, frightening when you have a card like Loyal Badger Bear to come out as a 4/4 that's deemed too good, and then you print something that's arguably just better than Loyal Badger Bear, and then you've had these big problems with the card generating units having too much stats, and then we still just come out and print a 5-cost card or a 5-stat 2-cost card generator. And then what is the deal with Jun the Prodigy, and why do you have so many stats in Ionia, especially when things like Barrier Lifesteal are basically worth a card? And so it's really odd in terms of seeing these things come out. And then the next step would be something like Combat Cook. I like it. He's a good card, don't get me wrong. I get that he kind of fits the themes of both Demacia and Freylord. I guess this tells us that, Demacia and Freylord are weapony kind of sets, which makes a little bit of sense to me. But I really wish that there was something kind of tying it all together to where you could look at it and see, okay, well, this P and Z unit gets to have a cool ability, but it's small. And then you get to see that this Demacia or this Freylord unit gets to be big, but it's just a lot of like vanilla stats and it doesn't generate cards or whatever. I don't feel like that there's enough identity given to each of the factions and what each of the factions, or at least the faction pairings, are supposed to be good at. Okay, and then as we finish out, I did have to bring my 5 hottest takes from the new set. And so the first one, the big one, I think Nora's going to be trash. Nora has gotten a lot of hype around her. I think that this card is not going to be any good. The mysterious portal mechanic, sure, I can see that having some impact on the meta, but I don't think Nora's going to do it. And so I didn't leave it as a thing in my section of hot takes, but I put for my card that I'm probably just going to hate the most after the first week of the game. Also Nora. I don't quite know where I stand in terms of how good she's going to be, but I think, well, I know where I stand. I think she's going to be pretty bad, but I guess I should say I'm just historically bad at rating all of the new cards. And so I feel like she's just not going to get it done. I feel like this is a fairly annoying mechanic that if she is good right from the start, that she'll just get nerfed into oblivion, and she might have, a week in the sun, but I think that she's going to be fairly bad overall. I do think some of these portal cards could turn out to be interesting, right? Much in the same vein of things like Tentacle Smash and draw card Nagakaboros and like all the abilities 6-cost tentacle thing, whatever. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But the way that those find their ways into various decks like Pirates and Annie decks and whatever, I can see some of these portal cards making their impact that way. But I don't feel like the likes of Nora is going to be that strong as much as it would be just playing Eclectic Collection within another deck. And that's not particularly a great idea. Something like the Teamaker is probably a better indicator of that. But the mysterious portal mechanic, wouldn't be surprised if it was kind of like, incidentally strong. Nora, I'm prescribing it now. She's going to be trash. My next big hot take, the most powerful champion out of the set is going to be Ornn. I think we've pretty historically well seen that these big 7-cost game enders are very good at being 7-cost game enders, and I think Ornn has a lot all wrapped up into a nice package. He has the opportunities to make these giant overwhelm units, right? That's one of the big key ways to get your expensive costed units into action, is they have to have overwhelm, elusive, or rallies, right? We've gotten overwhelms from Scion, we've gotten rallies from Galio, and I feel like Ornn is going to be right up there within that party of just being like coming down and going, LOL, oops, I won the game. The other thing that's kind of interesting to me with Ornn is his flip card, Bellows Breath, that's over here to the right, is quite interesting in that you forge an ally, deal 1 to all units, then you forge an ally and deal 1 to all units again. And so he has this nice AoE already built in. And it doesn't seem like if you're even a moderately dedicated Forge deck that it should be that challenging to get a 10 power strike in. And so it doesn't need to be a 10 power Nexus strike, it just needs to be an ally has struck for 10 damage. Ornn doesn't even need to see it, it just has to happen at some point at the game, and then you just have this giant dude that's ready to go, LOL, I win the game. I feel like Ornn is going to be quite interesting and strong and powerful. He is my hot take as the most impactful one out of the set. The next one to talk about, I don't know if it will be the most impactful or not. I feel like Ornn is going to be a little bit more impactful than Master Yi, but I feel like Master Yi is going to cause problems. And I don't entirely know what Riot's stance on this kind of situation is to where you have a deck that has, say, like a 60% win rate in Masters, but it has a 45% win rate in Silver. And that's the kind of champion that Master Yi strikes me as he looks to build these really big combo decks that need to generate a bunch of flow, and so the sequencing of cards that you play throughout the entirety of the game is extremely important. He has the OTK potential once you give him something like Elusive, and then he has the means to be protected within Ionia with the things like Deny and Memory Cloak and Nopify and barriers and stuff. There's just lots and lots of ways to come in and protect Master Yi. These are things that Masters levels players typically able to manage and take advantage of. The smaller end of the competitive spectrum, not so much. And so I don't think it's come up. It's come up in other games. Like the classic example in Hearthstone would have been with is it get on in here, get over here, whatever the 3 cost or the 5 cost 3/3 that when it takes a damage you make a copy of it, that made the big combo decks, was one of those things that was rampant in legend level play, but had a losing win rate in the lower ranks. I could most certainly see Master Yi being like that, as something that they have to decide, do we nerf it just because of the people at the top, or do we just let it roll and make them deal with it? Especially with a champion that's so iconic in the Legends or the Runeterra and the League of Legends universe, and that dropping nerfs onto Master Yi is going to feel quite bad for the more casual end of the spectrum. And so I'm curious. I have him listed as, oops, I messed up the balance of the game and I won't get fixed. And so we'll see how he actually turns out. The next one to talk about is the one I'm most excited to play with. That's going to be the Darkin Ballista, right up my alley, right in the wheelhouse of the things that old FTP Bust likes to do. Just a really, really aggressive equipment, giving +2 attack for 1 mana. This fixes a lot of the curves in Noxus to where you either missed your 1-drop or you had to make the decision of, do I play a 1-drop on turn 2 or do I play a 2-drop on turn 2? In that case, where if you play the 1, you have to bank the mana. You can now use that mana on a future turn for something like the Darkin Ballista. And this is a card that's also extremely good early and extremely good late. Getting that +2 attack permanently early is quite good. Spending 8 mana in the late game to have this reasonable Overwhelm Bro, pretty decent as well. Just a really nice package of good early, good late. That late game stuff isn't too expensive to be relevant, right? We're only spending 8 mana here and not 10. And then that late game unit gets to potentially kill a unit and then attack with Overwhelm. Like I think everything here in the Darkin Ballista is wrapped up into an extremely nice, aggressive package. We've seen here recently how these kind of like mid-gamey plays can be exceptional in aggro decks as well with the Riptide Sermon, and so I'm pretty interested to pick that one up. And so the last card we'll talk about, I have it as the card I'm going to hate the most, and this is this stupid Shadow Isles removal spell, right? Where's that at? It costs 1 mana, Quietus. If I passed it, it's in the Shadow Isles section. Here it is, over here to the left. 1 mana slow spell, kill a unit with 2 or less power, or destroy a unit's equipment. Gonna hate it. As you come out here and say, hey guys, I want to play the Darkin Spear, whatever that thing is called. I want to get the Bone Splitter going on out here. I want to put this in my aggressive Noxus deck. And then there's a card like Quietus that just comes in and kills off a cheap unit. That's going to make me upsetting. It's not that even that it kills a small unit, it's the low attack unit. And so maybe we'll get to dodge it. We just won't get to play Annie anymore. But this is the one I've kind of put forth as going to be the one that we hate. And it's probably not even so much Quietus as much as it's the decks that get built around it. If you're looking to really stall out the game and play really super slow and get your control deck on and play chess by yourself on a Friday night, then this is probably a card for you. And it's just not the stuff that we like to play. And so, if that's your thing, more power to you. Hopefully we just don't play games against each other. But that is the one listed as the one that I'm going to hate the most. And so I'm excited. I can't wait. The new cards should be active here in a couple of hours. I'm ready to play with them. I hope you're ready to play with them too. And that is going to do it for us today. And so agree or disagree with what we say, like it or dislike it, feel free to leave a comment down below. And then that is going to do it. And so hope everyone enjoyed the video. Maybe learned a thing or two along the way and had a good time watching. This is Bust, and we thank you for being here.